Ego and Archetype, Part 19. So we continue through Chapter 7. There is an exact parallel to this number symbolism in the formula Hegel proposed for understanding the historical process. According to Hegel, all the movements and happenings in human history fall into a threefold cyclic pattern. First, an original position is conceived and established. This is called the thesis. Next, the opposite position is constellated, grows, and finally overthrows the first. This is called the antithesis. In the final phase, the one-sidedness and inadequacy of the antithesis is recognized and replaced by a synthesis of the two opposites. The formula is thus thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The synthesis can then become a new thesis through which the cycle is repeated. This was an insight of the first magnitude. It is supremely simple and self-evidently true once grasped. Whether or not this can be demonstrated in history, it can certainly be verified empirically in individual psychology. It is one more expression of the archetype of the Trinity, which gives structure and meaning to the dynamic temporal events of human life in contrast to the static eternal aspect. There is an inveterate tendency for mankind to conceive of deity in a threefold nature. The Christian Trinity is only one example of this. In his essay, Jung describes Babylonian and Egyptian trinities. In addition, there are Greek trinities: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and the various embodiments of the triple mother goddess. Destiny, the force directing one's temporal fate, has generally been conceived in a threefold image. For example, in Greece, there were the three fates: Clotho, who spins the thread of life; Lachesis, or Lochesis, who measures it; and Atropos, who cuts it. In Teutonic myth, there were the three Norns: Urd, Verdandi, and Schuld. Urd, the aged one, refers to the past; Verdandi to the present; and Schuld to the future. Hermes was not frequently considered as a trinity. Numerous shrines were set up in his honor at the junctions of three roads until they became so commonplace that they provided the origin of the word trivia. This list of examples, which could be considerably expanded, indicates a widespread tendency to associate deity with a threefold nature. How are we to understand this in the light of our conviction that the psyche has a fourfold structure? These Trinitarian images may refer to functional or process deities as opposed to structure deities. In other words, they would be personifications of the psychic dynamism in all its phases. From this standpoint, a trinity could express totality as well as a quaternity, but it would be totality of a different kind. In the one case, it would be a totality of the various dynamic phases of a developmental movement. In the other case, a totality of structural elements. 3 would symbolize a process, 4 a goal. Gerhard Adler makes a distinction between feminine triads and masculine triads. He states, The feminine triad is always connected with instinctual events in their natural development and growth, whereas the masculine three is based on a dynamic opposition between thesis and antithesis, finding the reconciliation in the third step of the synthesis. This is undoubtedly true. The feminine trinities seem to derive from the categories of the natural, biological, one could almost say non-psychic growth process, such as birth, maturation, and death, while the masculine trinities seem to relate specifically to the development of the psyche or consciousness. In the latter case, we have not biological categories, but rather spiritual or psychic ones, such as thesis and antithesis, or God and Satan. However, despite this distinct difference, in the broad sense, both masculine and feminine trinities refer to a dynamic developmental process in time. In earlier chapters, I outlined a scheme of psychological development to explain the relations between ego and self, which we observe at the various levels of conscious development. I likewise made use of a threefold pattern, the three entities being the ego, the self or non-ego, and the connecting link between them, ego-self axis. According to this hypothesis, development of consciousness occurs via a threefold cycle which repeats itself again and again throughout the lifetime of the individual. The three phases of this repetitive cycle are: 1. Ego identified with self. 2. Alienated from self. And 3. Ego reunited with self through the ego-self axis. In briefer terms, these stages could be called: 1. The stage of the self. 2. The stage of the ego. And 3. The stage of the ego-self axis. These three stages correspond precisely with the three terms of the Christian Trinity: the age of the Father, self; the age of the Son, ego; and the age of the Holy Ghost, ego-self axis. This is another example of a threefold pattern expressing the totality of a temporal developmental process. The medieval idea that man is composed of body, soul, and spirit is another Trinitarian representation of totality. Similarly, according to alchemical theory, all metals were composed of the three primary principles: mercury, sulfur, and salt. Paracelsus combined these two conceptions when he wrote, "Now, in order that these three distinct substances may be rightly understood, namely spirit, soul, and body, it should be known that they signify nothing else than the three principles. Mercury, sulfur, and salt, from which all the seven metals are generated. For mercury is the spirit, sulfur is the soul, and salt is the body." A modern dream, end of quote. The alchemical literature is, I find it incredibly fascinating. That's the end of the quote. A modern dream expresses the same image. A man dreamed, in order for an enterprise to reach completion, three things must come together. There must be chili, a chili parlor, and RN. A man of initiative and effectiveness must say the word chili. or Chilai, it's spelled with one L. The dream says the enterprise must be consummated only when body, soul, and spirit come together. Chilai, or chili, is the hot soul stuff. The chili pala is the body, the concrete context for realization. And the uttering of the word is the spontaneous creative act of spirit. Part 2. Transformation and development. The theme of transformation, of death and rebirth, which is a dynamic developmental happening, is also associated with the number 3. 3 days is the symbolical duration of the night sea journey. Example, Christ, Jonah. Christ was crucified between 2 thieves. It was thus a triple crucifixion. Similarly, Mithra was commonly represented between 2 Dadophori or torchbearers, one with torch raised, the other with torch lowered. The theme of the way, in which a third middle course emerges out of the dialectic of opposites, is another expression of triadic symbolism. In this connection, one thinks of the saying of Lao Tzu, the one engenders the two engenders the three, and the three engenders all things. Tao Te Ching. The relation between the image of the way and the ternary symbolism is illustrated in a very interesting case study published by Adler. After about 3 months of analysis, the patient had the following dream. I heard a voice saying very clearly, in 3 days' time. End of quote. 3 days after this dream, the patient had an intensely moving fantasy, which she described as follows. I can see my own unconscious not as something alien, but as something made of the same stuff of which I am also made, so that there is a road, an unbroken connection between me and all other creatures and it. I can feel how this goes to the root of my neurotic problem. I had a direct perception of something unrelated to and impossible to relate to the rest of my experience. The world, therefore, did not make sense, and it was therefore almost literally impossible to live. Now the world makes sense again. End of quote. 5 days after this fantasy, she had another vigil image of, quote, 3 intersecting circles seen as 3-dimensional, with vertical and horizontal poles passing through the points of intersection. End of quote. These 3 unconscious images, all coming within a period of 8 days, demonstrate a clear connection between the number 3 and the theme of the road or the way. As Adler observes, the phrase "in 3 days' time" refers to the night sea journey. This was verified by subsequent developments. The vision of the 3 circles again emphasizes the number 3. The description of the road fantasy is most interesting. Here the patient is becoming aware of a connecting link between herself, the ego, and the non-ego. I would understand the road, which brings a sense of union and reconciliation, as a representation of the ego self-axis. I would understand the road, which brings a sense of union and reconciliation as a representation of the ego self-axis. This discovery is reached through a 3-fold process involving the 3 terms, ego, non-ego, and the connecting link between them. Hence, the emphasis on the number 3. In fairy tales, we find a wealth of ternary symbols. Important actions leading to transformation or achievement of the goal must often be repeated 3 times. In many cases, the story makes it clear that action number 1 is based on one side of a pair of opposites. Action number 2 is based on the other side of the pair of opposites. And action number 3 is a synthesis or reconciliation of the 2 opposites. To give a single example, in Grimm's fairy tale, The Water of Life, a princess is waiting to marry the man who will come straight down a golden pavement to her gate. 3 brothers try to reach her. The first, not wanting to damage the pavement, rides to the right of it and is refused admittance. The second, also not wanting to damage the pavement, rides to the left of it and is denied entrance. The third, preoccupied with reaching the princess, does not even see the golden pavement and rides straight down the road. He is the one admitted and allowed to marry the princess. These examples go to show that in a certain aspect of psychic life, totality is symbolically expressed by 3 and not by 4. This aspect is the developmental temporal process of realization. Although the goal is 4-fold, the process of realizing it is 3-fold. Thus, the 3 and the 4 would represent 2 separate aspects of life. 4 is structural wholeness, completion, something static and eternal. 3, on the other hand, represents the totality of the cycle of growth and dynamic change, conflict and resolution, and renewed conflict again. Thus, in accordance with the Trinitarian formula, the thesis 3 and the antithesis 4 must be resolved in a new synthesis. Jung, over and over again in his writings, returned to the alchemical question. 3 are here, but where is the 4th? This wavering between 3 and 4 is well explained by the theory of the 4 functions and the striving for wholeness. However, the antagonism between the 3 and the 4 could have another meaning also. It could refer to the proper and necessary conflict in man between the completeness of the static, eternal quaternity and the dynamic change and vitality of the Trinity. Quaternity and mandala symbolism, including the Temenos and magic circle, distinctly emphasize the theme of containment. Add this to the fact that even numbers are traditionally considered feminine, while Add this to the fact that even numbers are traditionally considered feminine, while odd numbers are thought of as male. This suggests that the quaternity may be predominantly an expression of the mother archetype, or feminine principle with emphasis on static support and containment, whereas the Trinity is a manifestation of the father archetype, or masculine principle, which emphasizes movement, activity, and initiative. If this view is valid, we would then need another image of totality to unite the opposites 3 and 4. If the Trinity can carry an equal but different significance to the quaternity, it should emerge in empirical psychological material with about the same frequency as emphasis and emphasis as does the quaternity. And indeed, this is the case. I turned to a collection of mandalas published by Jung and was surprised to find how frequently there was Trinitarian imagery embedded in pictures which had been selected to demonstrate the quaternity. A mandala reproduced by Jung entitled The Tibetan World Wheel is interesting in this respect. It is said to represent the world. The wheel is held by the god of death, Yama, and is based on a Trinitarian pattern. At the center are three animals: cock, snake, and pig. There are 6 spokes on the wheel and 12 outer divisions. Jung says about this mandala, the incomplete state of existence is remarkably enough expressed by a triadic system, and the complete spiritual state by a tetradic system. The relation between the incomplete and the complete state therefore corresponds to the proportion of 3:4. I would add to this that a complete state is also static, eternal, otherworldly. It would correspond to the image of a God who does not participate in the conflict and flux of history, one who does not undergo development. I think that's the end of quote. When one begins to examine unconscious material with the Trinity in mind, he discovers that ternary symbols are not uncommon. For instance, a man who had been in analysis for many years with the problem of persistent containment in the Ouroboros had the following dream. He dreamt that a circular object was being divided into triangular sectors, much as one would cut a pie into pieces. The two geometric forms, circle and triangle, seemed to stand out in the dream and impress themselves on the dreamer. The dream carried a sense of impact and importance. To the circle was associated Jung's conception of the mandala, wholeness, something to be desired. To the triangle, the patient associated the Trinitarian image of God. If we are to understand this dream at all, we must resort to some conceptual generalizations, such as I am trying to present. In the dream, a circle is being dismembered into triangles, following which the image of a circle is contrasted with the image of a triangle. I understand this dream as referring to the breakup of an original state of Ouroboros wholeness, what I have called ego self-identity, by means of a threefold dynamic process represented by the triangle. The dream contrasts the complete circular state with the threefold triangular state. I take this to mean that an attitude emphasizing static completeness must be complemented by the Trinitarian dynamic principle. The threefold temporal process breaks up the static eternal state and subjects it to a development of events in time involving recurrent conflicts and resolutions according to the formula thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Another patient had this dream. She dreamt she was a student in a classroom. She feels confident about her lesson, and when asked to recite the assignment, begins to give the multiplication, oh man, why can't I say these words? Multiplication table of 4. 4 times 1, 4 times 2, etc. The teacher interrupts, saying that this is not the assignment. The assignment is to multiply 3 place numbers by 4. Her confidence gone. The dreamer realizes she is not yet able to multiply 3 place numbers in her head and sits down in confusion. Her association to 4 was the quaternity of psychic wholeness, the mandala. About 3 place numbers, she said that they tripled the difficulty of multiplying, and also that 3 reminded her of the Christian Trinity. This dream seems to speak directly to our subject. Simple one-dimensional fourness is not the assignment. Rather, fourness is to be met in a threefold setting, making it much more complex and difficult. Fourness, or psychic totality, must be actualized by submitting it to the threefold process of realization in time. One must submit oneself to the painful dialectic of the developmental process. The quaternity must be complemented by the Trinity. The quaternity must be complemented by the Trinity. Another example is taken from Adler's case, a case study previously mentioned. This dream occurred several years before the beginning of analysis and is considered to have initiated the individuation process. Quote. It carried a powerful impact and was recorded as follows. I saw on an oval patch of blackness, which shaded off vaguely, a rod made of yellowish white metal. At one end of it was a monogram of the figures 1, 2, and 4, superimposed on one another. End of quote. The dreamer's association to the monogram of numbers were particularly significant. The rod reminded her of a key or magic wand, and she associated it with the labarum carried before Roman emperors. She was reminded especially of Constantine's dream on the eve of battle, in which he saw the sign of the cross in the sky and heard a voice say, "In hoc signal vinces." Signal vinces. Concerning this dream, Adler writes, so far as the sequence 1, 2, 4 is concerned, it represents the development of the mandala symbol and the psychic of totality. The number 1 represents an original pre-conscious totality. 2 is the division of this pre-conscious totality into 2 polarities, producing 2 opposites, and the further subdivision corresponding to the synthesis arising out of thesis and antithesis would produce the 4 parts of the circle, and with its center signifying the mandala. The sequence of the 3 numbers, 1, 2, 4, would thus represent the natural growth, the formula of the mandala. End of quote. Adler then quotes Jung as saying, this unspeakable conflict posited by duality resolves itself in a 4th principle which restores the unity of the first in its full development. The rhythm is built up in 3 steps, but the resultant symbol is quaternity. Later, Adler confuses this interpretation by finding it necessary to account for what he calls the striking emission of the number 3. He interprets the emission of the masculine 3 as representing a compensation for the patient's identification with the patriarchal world. In my opinion, this second interpretation is dubious and, if true, would invalidate the first. The number 3 is already in the sequence 1, 2, 4. If it is taken as a totality, since it is a threefold sequence. The number 3 is already in the sequence 1, 2, 4 if it is taken as a totality, since it is a threefold sequence. Consider it to be a geometric series rather than an arithmetic one. The 3 is quite properly missing. If I understand the symbolism correctly, substituting the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4 for for the dream sequence 124 would destroy the essence of this symbolic meaning, which I understand to be combination of a threefold process with a fourfold goal. Jung provides us with another example of the fusion quantity and ternary images. I referred to the Mandela vision published in Psychology and Alchemy. Quote, "The dreamer sees a vertical and a horizontal circle having a common center. This is the world clock. It is supported by a black bird. The vertical circle is a blue disc with a white border divided into 32 partitions. A pointer rotates upon it. The horizontal circle consists of 4 colors. On it stand 4 little men with pendulums, and round it is laid a golden ring. The clock has 3 rhythms or pulses. 1, the small pulse. The vertical pointer advances by 1 to 32. The middle pulse, 1 complete revolution of the vertical pointer. At the same time, the horizontal circle advances 1 to 32. The great pulse, 32 middle pulses, are equal to 1 revolution of the golden ring. Oh man, it's crazy, right? End of quote. This vision is a beautiful mandala image with a marked emphasis on the quaternity. Example, 4 colors, 4 little men. However, it has a threefold pulse or rhythm. In Psychology and Alchemy, originally published in 1944, Jung emphasizes the quaternity aspect of the image and only says about the 3 rhythms. I do not know what the 3 rhythms allude to, but I do not doubt for a moment that the illusion is amply justified. We shall hardly be mistaken if we assume that our mandala aspires to the most complete union of opposites that is possible, including that of the masculine trinity and the feminine quaternity." End of quote. In his commentary on the same vision in Psychology and Religion, published first in English in 1938, Jung has this to say about the threefold rhythm. I'm sorry, I'm just a bit confused there because he went back in time here, so he's commentary, same vision in psychology. Quote, "If we hark back to the old Pythagorean idea that the soul is a square, then the mandala would express the deity through its threefold rhythm and the soul through its static quaternity. The circle divided into 4 colors, and thus its innermost meaning would simply be the union of the soul with God." End of quote. And later he says, "The quaternity is the sine qua non of divine, sine qua non of divine birth, and consequently of the inner life of the Trinity. Thus, circle and quaternity on one side and the threefold rhythm on the other interpenetrate so that each is contained in the other." End of quote. It is clear from these quotations that Jung does not consider the quaternity a completely adequate symbol for totality. Rather, a union of the quaternity with the Trinity in a more complete synthesis is required. If, when confronted with 3, it is proper to ask where is 4, it is equally proper when confronted with 4 to ask where is 3. Because of preoccupation with the quaternity, one must see only the 4 in imagery that actually combines both 4 and 3. The theme of 12, for instance, includes both 3 and 4 as its factors. Likewise, the number 7 combines 4 and 3 being their sum. By being the sum. The Trinity archetype seems to symbolize individuation as a process, while the quaternity symbolizes its goal or completed state. 3 is the number for egohood, 4 is the number for wholeness, the self. But since individuation is never truly complete, each temporary state of completion or wholeness must be submitted once again to the dialectic of the Trinity in order for life to go on. Wow, man. Wow. Still in chapter 7. Oh no, sorry. End of chapter 7.